So you want to own a plane,
Gulfstream G.
not to fly it. Not to put your logo on the tail. You want to own it the way a landlord owns an apartment building, collecting rent while someone else deals with the tenants. Here's the paradox. The airline flying your plane is fighting for survival on margins thinner than a razor blade. The person who owns the plane the airline is flying, they get paid whether that flight is full, empty, on time, or cancelled. So why does an industry famous for bankruptcies keep pulling in the biggest banks, private equity firms, and Irish leasing giants on earth? How does a $120 million machine that starts losing value the second it leaves the factory in Seattle become one of the most quietly desirable assets in global finance? And why, roughly once a decade, does this exact business destroy men who were richer, smarter, and more careful than you will ever be? We'll come back to all three. First, the price of admission, Tier 1, roughly $3 million. This buys you a 20-year-old narrowbody, a tired 737 Classic, or an Airbus A320 CEO nobody wants anymore. You convert it to cargo, lease it to a regional freight operator, and collect a modest check, the hidden cost. The engines are near the end of their life cycle, and the $8 million overhaul bill arrives almost immediately, sometimes before your first year of rent clears. Tier 2, $120 million. A brand new Airbus A320neo or Boeing 737 MAX. This is the serious money. Private equity funds, aviation-focused family offices, institutional lessors. You sign a 10 to 12-year dry lease, hand the airline the keys, and collect roughly $400,000 a month. The hidden cost. You're financing 80% of that $120 million with debt, and the bank does not care if your tenant stops paying. Tier 3, $300 million and up. A widebody, an Airbus A350, a Boeing 787. Or better, you skip owning one plane entirely and buy into a fleet of hundreds through a leasing platform. This is where AerCap and Avalon live. Companies managing thousands of aircraft worth tens of billions of dollars combined. The hidden cost at this level isn't cash. It's exposure. One bad geopolitical decision on the other side of the planet can wipe out hundreds of your jets overnight. We'll get to exactly how that happens. Remember that number. Hundreds of jets, gone overnight. It matters later if you've made it this far. You already think about money differently than most people watching this platform. Stay, because the next part is the part almost nobody outside of Wall Street understand. Most people think airlines make aviation profitable. The reality is airlines barely make money at all. Delta, American, United, their margins hover in the low single digits in a good year. The real profit sits one level above the airline, in a layer most passengers never think about. Think of it like this. The airline is a tenant running a restaurant inside your building. The restaurant might struggle, might even close. You don't care. You already collected the rent, and if they leave, you release the space to the next tenant within 30 days. That's dry leasing. You own the aircraft. The airline handles pilots, fuel, insurance, and passengers. Every operational headache that actually loses money. You collect roughly $400,000 a month, guaranteed by contract for over a decade. Across the life of one aircraft, that's close to $50 million in pure yield before a single dollar of resale value. That's why nearly half of the world's commercial aircraft aren't owned by the airlines flying them. They're owned by leasing companies the public has never heard of. The system is built on three mechanisms. First, the dry lease itself. 10 to 12 years, ironclad, non-cancelable without massive penalty. The airline can go bankrupt. The lease obligation often survives the airline's own restructuring. Second, accelerated depreciation. Governments in the United States and Ireland let owners write off a huge percentage of a $120 million aircraft's value in the first few years, even though the plane will safely fly for 25. For a fund managing billions, that's not a tax break. That's a legal mechanism to shield enormous income from taxation. Third, the boneyard. Around year 25, the airframe is retired to a desert facility like Victorville, California, and methodically dismantled in a process called parting out. Engines, landing gear, avionics, all stripped and resold. A dead aircraft can still yield up to $5 million in harvested parts. The asset pays you even after it dies. Most people see a plane. Owners see a 25-year cash flow schedule with a guaranteed floor at the bottom. If this business is so engineered, so protected, so guaranteed, why do experienced owners keep losing everything? Because there is one component inside every aircraft that doesn't care about your contract, your tax strategy, or your spreadsheet: the engine. It accounts for up to 40% of the aircraft's total value, and it is brutally mechanically honest. A single overhaul, tearing the turbine down to individual titanium blades and rebuilding it, costs $8 to $10 million. If your lessee collapses right before that overhaul comes due, you inherit a $120 million asset that legally cannot fly until you inject another $20 million into it. The engine is the villain of this entire industry. Everything else is financial engineering built around managing its risk. In September 2008, AIG needed a $182 billion federal bailout to survive. Buried inside AIG was a company most Americans had never heard of: International Lease Finance Corporation, ILFC, founded by an aviation pioneer named Stephen Udvar-Hazy. At the time, ILFC controlled over 900 aircraft. ILFC wasn't reckless. It was simply leveraged, the way almost every large lessor is leveraged, heavily financed with debt against future lease income. But when its parent company collapsed, ILFC became a forced seller inside a company fighting for its life. Udvar-Hazy left in 2009 to start a competitor, Air Lease Corporation, essentially rebuilding his old company from scratch. AIG spent years trying to extract value from ILFC before finally selling it to AerCap in 2014 for $7.6 billion, a fraction of what the fleet was worth on paper, sold at exactly the wrong moment for exactly the wrong reason. The lesson: the plane wasn't the problem. The debt sitting underneath it was. In 2007, Singapore Airlines took delivery of the very first Airbus A380 ever built. The largest passenger aircraft in history, a $250 million statement of prestige and scale. Airlines and lessors bet billions that hub-and-spoke aviation would keep demanding giant four-engine jets. It didn't. Airlines shifted towards smaller, twin-engine wide-bodies that burn dramatically less fuel per seat. The A380's four thirsty engines went from a selling point to almost overnight, by 2017, just 10 years after its first flight. That exact aircraft, Singapore Airlines' first A380, was retired and dismantled for parts in France. 10 years old, barely middle-aged for a commercial jet. Scrapped because there was no secondary market willing to lease a plane nobody wanted to fuel anymore. Airbus eventually ended A380 production in 2021 after the program lost an estimated $25 billion. The lesson: you can own the newest, most impressive machine in the sky and still lose everything to an engine you didn't build. In 2023, Pratt & Whitney discovered a contamination flaw in the powder metal used to manufacture components in its geared turbofan engine, the engine powering a large portion of the Airbus A320neo fleet worldwide. The fix required pulling hundreds of aircraft out of service globally for accelerated inspections, some grounded for months. RTX, Pratt & Whitney's parent company, set aside an estimated $6 to $7 billion to compensate airlines and lessors for the disruption. Owners who had structured airtight 12-year leases, who had calculated depreciation to the month, who thought they had eliminated every variable, watched their aircraft sit motionless on tarmacs, earning nothing, because of a contamination issue inside a part they never see, made by a company they don't control. The villain doesn't need a war or a recession. Sometimes it's just powder metal. Scenario 1. You buy a $120 million A320neo in 2015, finance 80%, lease it for 12 years at $400,000 a month. Total lease income, roughly $57. $6 million. Add depreciation tax shielding worth millions more against other income. At year 25, you part it out for another $5 million. Total realized value after debt service, comfortably north of $40 million in profit on an original $24 million cash outlay. A 5 times return, largely passive over 25 years. Scenario 2. That same airline goes bankrupt in year 6. Your engine overhaul is due. You're staring at a $20 million bill with no maintenance reserve fund to cover it because you never enforced one. Lease rates for your now outdated aircraft have collapsed since the Neo generation arrived. The bank calls the loan. You sell into a depressed market at a $30 million loss. Same plane, same industry, A $70 million swing between the two outcomes, decided almost entirely by whether you controlled the engine risk or let the engine control you. Most people think an airline sells seats. An airline sells the illusion of ownership over a machine it doesn't actually own. The real owner sits one layer above the passengers, above the pilots, above the airline itself, collecting rent on a flying asset that can be repossessed in the night, repainted and released on the other side of the planet within 30 days. An airplane isn't a transportation asset. It's a real estate portfolio that happens to move at 600 miles an hour, and the rent never stops until the engine says otherwise.